we wouldn't be a true analytics conference if we didn't mention GenAI, right, in the first hour. So let's just see by a quick show of hands how many have used GenAI personally. Yesterday, last 5 minutes, right? Okay, and how about how many of you have plans to implement GenAI in your organization? How many of you are noodling, right? Quite a bit, right? So we definitely see the benefit of ChatGPT personally. So it's a best next step to try to incorporate it in your workplace today. As I'm myself, I am also trying to noodle some use cases for that. So that is a really great introduction to welcome Shreyes Becker, Head of Global AI and Data Products, and Faisal Rajan, Project Lead Commercial Data and AI from Sanofi, who will present 2 use cases to us on their take of whether GenAI is overhyped. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Okay. Luckily, there was no hype for us walking in.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I know while we have some slides, obviously, to share as well, but by way of introduction, my name is Faisal. I'm part of the project team leading a project for commercial artificial intelligence and analytics projects at Sanofi. My background is basically from many different areas. So what I look to do is bring in my background and experience from other areas like accounting and finance and customer success into this new world of analytics.
Okay. Sorry. So yeah, this is.
We blame GenAI.
Someone really doesn't want me to talk. Anyway, looks like it works. Okay, so thank you, Faisal. That's me and Faisal, actually. That's our everyday. We have a huge set of people telling us, what everybody is doing GenAI, everybody is doing GenAI. And then when I go talk to customers within Sanofi, they are like, hey, dude, connect me to the internet. The gap is so big. So, that's our day-to-day. And as Faisal was saying, we kind of sit in the middle between both these groups. I'm Shreyes, by the way. I work on a lot of GenAI products that we build in a company called Sanofi. So just for a quick background, Sanofi makes drugs that helps people.
So yeah, one thing, we want to make it a bit of a conversation. So the role I'm playing here is a GenAI realist. My colleague here, Shreyes, is playing more of an optimist, and that's very true of how we behave within the organization as well. So Shreyes, you mentioned we know that everyone is doing GenAI. We get a lot of vendors telling us you need to do GenAI. That is the next thing. And then on the other side, we have the business saying, I need a problem solved. Sandeep mentioned previously about elevators, right? So if I don't need to go to the higher floor, I don't need that problem solved, but there are other problems that I need solved. What ends up happening as a result of this is then we get a lot of noise, right? And if you've seen sort of the early bits of artificial intelligence, we were looking at 1950s or so when Alan Turing came out with a paper on intelligence. And he talks about do machines actually have intelligence, and goes through this sort of the experience mathematically of what it would look like. And then we come fast forward to here. So we know for a fact that, 1, AI is not new, obviously, but 2, and Gartner has shown this as well, that there is quite a hype, and quite a hype cycle. And I think according to Gartner, there's about 2 or 3 years before we reach the peak of inflated expectations for GenAI. So Shreyes, I know you wanted to talk about, what do you see as being the hype about? What is the hype really about, and what shows you the hype?
I don't think that it's a hype. I think GenAI is really, really a real thing. It's here to stay. That's my take on it. And I have reasons to say, right? The first thing, it's very, very obvious, is that people are investing more and more and more in GenAI. Goldman Sachs is pretty credible, pretty reliable. We're not in 2008 anymore, so maybe we could rely. But what's clear is that the investment's going up. And another funny thing, it's pretty interesting. I know valuation is a interesting topic that's up for debate all the time, but let's just take for the sake of what is valuation. If you look at the top 10 Fortune 100 companies, right? Fortune 10 companies, basically, they're usually valued somewhere between 0.2x to 0.8 or to like 8x revenue. But a lot of the Gen AI startups, some of them aren't even like small anymore. They're like fairly decently sized, but most of them, pretty much all of them, in fact, are trending somewhere around the 100x valuation multiple. And the range that we got, like when we looked at around 30 companies or so, it's always around 66 to 500x. So I don't know, man. I think Gen AI is real. I don't know why you want to be optimist. It's here. You should go do it.
Well, I would say, when we look at the valuations themselves, to me, valuation follows the hype, right? So we see that if there is a lot of hype coming in, for example, OpenAI, and there's a huge potential, we see that coming through. But I see obviously that there is also other investments in GenAI that are happening through, for example, in the United States, in China, across the world, expected to hit about $160 billion in investment globally. So, we've talked a little bit about what's hype and what's not hype, but let's make this a little bit more real. So, Shreyes, if you can give us some examples of how you think about applying this in your role.
I think one thing I think most people should realize is Gen AI is a paradigm change. This is a very, very, very busy slide, but I'll try and walk you through it. And this is something that we kind of do when we do Gen AI. Gen AI is not like this final thing that you plug on top of your current data systems or anything of that nature. It requires its own thing. The first and the most important thing that Gen AI unlocks for you is a lot of your unstructured data sources. Within Sanofi, we have incredible number of documents that people write. We have incredible number of emails that people send to each other. Just the amount of unstructured data that exists is crazy. But we did not have a way to properly use them before. But with Gen AI, you have this entire new paradigm of unlocking insights from incredible number of unstructured data sources. And when you think across the face, right, when you look at data depositories, that's another more comparable thing or a dependency on the unstructured data source that we are kind of bringing into the play. The first thing that you see is that we are starting to use metadata stores on unstructured data. So one of the things we are doing right now is building a knowledge bot that basically looks around all the various PDF documents that gets generated for a specific process by maybe 7 or 8 teams. And when we try to run a search on it, we are using Gen AI to create metadata tags, create lineage, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of focus on the more infrastructure kind of related activities as well that we are doing with Gen AI today. So it's not just hey, let's go build something with Gen AI. It's how do we build something to make Gen AI real? So if you really need to be successful, there is a lot of underlying effort that kind of needs to go into it, and it's not about hey, who do I use? It's not a question of OpenAI or whatever, right? This is more foundational questions that people have to start answering when they think about working with Gen AI. The other thing that we are also starting to see is when we built applications for the first time on Gen AI, when our data scientists basically wrote in all caps and basically shouted at the computer, Gen AI produced better results. We were very surprised when we saw it for the first time. Why does this Gen AI thing behave nice when you scream at it? There are actually scientific literature on it. I don't exactly know the reasons. I don't understand it why, but I don't know. But that's how Gen AI kind of works at this stage. You scream at it, it write everything in caps, and it start producing better results. So how do you even do prompt engineering properly? So there's a lot of thinking that is happening at this stage. A lot of us, when we use ChatGPT, we are kind of looking at prompt engineering as this very simple thing. Okay, I ask a question and nudge it in a different direction. So, but when you think of deploying things at scale, it kind of becomes okay, how do I do this? How do I set it in a way that it produces repeatable, trustable results? So there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen for your specific application that you might want to build within your company. And then there are a few other things. I'm not going to go into each and everything, but the core message here is this. Gen AI, for the more ground up or the data piece of work, when is not a system of record. It's a system of action. What do I really mean by this is very, very simple. when we think typically about data storage or data governance or data architecture and all of those nice things, we are always looking at it from a perspective of it's a records keeping thing, or if I don't do this right, maybe I go to jail, or like something like that happens, or somebody's personal information goes out. No, that's a very, very records-driven approach to how you think about those things. But with GenAI, what we are realizing is that you should build it for action, because with this, your people are interacting in ways that you've never experienced people interacting with data before. This is not clicking two things on a Power BI and saying something nice. No, this is not that. This is more like, hey, I can actually talk to the computer. I can actually understand what's happening. I want to ask follow-up questions. I want to tag my colleague. I want to bring my another colleague, and I want to get his perspective on it. The types of applications people are building are very, very, very different. So you need to be thinking in terms of building systems of action. And we've actually seen this in the SaaS space as well before, Faisal. Like, it's not a new thing. Like when you think of like Salesforce is a great, great, great company, but when you think of Salesforce, at the end of the day, it's a system of record. But then when you see the types of companies Salesforce is buying today, be it Slack, be it Tableau, they are actually systems of action. So, it kind of follows a path that we've seen in the software space. That's like data is also software in many ways. But the whole idea is that when you're doing GenAI, if you take one thing away from today's talk, it's not just throwing a nice application on top. It's more about how do I build the system of action that makes multiple GenAI applications real. And I know I'm talking like I've done a bunch of things, but Faisal's also done a lot of things. Maybe I would like to hear from him.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Shreyes. And what I would actually echo on something that Shreyes mentioned is thinking, before we even get to the myths and the reality, and I'm going to lead the witness here a little bit more, but what's very interesting about what Shreyes showed is the multi-pronged approach of thinking about it, right? You have to think about ingestion, about processing, about everything when you're looking at GenAI, similar to how you would look at not just AI, but also digital. I've always found that the question of scalability in AI and in GenAI is very, very similar to scalability in digital. And with that, I think what's been very interesting when we look at what the hype versus what the reality has been, a lot of these statements that I've put up here, and I'll kind of quickly breeze through them. Again, I am leading the witness. I'm hoping nobody here is actually saying statements like this, but that is what we hear, especially when we look at literacy amongst our business colleagues who think about the problems they need to solve and not about the technology they need to use to solve it. So for example, if we look at value delivery, right? So if the question is that is generative AI going to be the bulk of value that will be generated, again, I hope that's obviously not true. You have legacy artificial intelligence. If you have your researchers, as an example, writing on pieces of paper for their clinical studies, GenAI is not your winner here. You need a lot more of a language and an appreciation for digital before you get to that point. The other interesting thing over here is on ease of use. So this myth that because it's a large language model, you can just plug it into anything. So once you have ChatGPT, you can, not to get too technical, but you can just set up a structure, do a bunch of API calls, and now you're able to get answers back from GenAI, and therefore your entire problem is solved. Very often you need a multifaceted approach. When you're doing a POC, a proof of concept, that stands. It's very easy to run a Jupyter notebook, run a bunch of algorithms, and you're good to go. But if you want this to be scalable, it has to be a multi-pronged approach. You need not only the infrastructure side, as my colleague Shreyes mentioned, but also the business layers and the intelligence side that come through it. How is the business actually going to use that data? On the success criteria side, the myth that comes very often is, can we pick the best model? Is it Llama? Is it Gemini? What are we going to pick for the model du jour? That itself is only representing about 15% of the success criteria. A lot more, again, and Sandeep has mentioned this before, and my colleague Shreyes as well, comes to the business problem you're trying to solve, right back to the fundamentals. And finally, that GenAI itself will instantly affect every part of the organization. And I think, again, very obvious, we have to name one digital tool that affects every part of the organization. Maybe Slack, maybe Teams, but other than that, there's very few of them that actually do that. We should not expect GenAI to be of a similar flavor.
And maybe just to add on to it, right? Like most of us here are probably like in the early stages of GenAI adoption, and we'll probably adopt GenAI and do GenAI much faster than we ever did AI or data or most things in general. So having a clear understanding of like what a myth is and what a reality is, and like being able to dispel the myths I think kind of helps like just with like expectation setting, because the expectation around Gen AI today is incredibly high. But the reality is like, like we still have to do a lot of work to catch up with the expectation.
Exactly. And when we were thinking about some of the work that we had to do in terms of actually using Gen AI in some spaces, me being a realist, what we were still doing on our side was making sure that we had these buckets of work when we scale up and think high level. So on our side, we were saying, okay, well, we can invest in Gen AI, whether through services, specific applications itself, machine learning operations, if you want to do model monitoring or anything to do on that front, along with maybe some effort in foundational models and the math behind it to improve that, or work specifically on our cloud platforms or hardware. And what we found on our side was that the most amount of value was actually coming in on user-based applications. So we don't want to be solving a problem, depending on the organization that you are, that has already been solved for the industry at scale. So the applications that we build would be for our users, for our problems specifically that we need to solve, and will bring value to our organization.
And maybe just to add on to it, right? One way of thinking about it is like there are two ends here. Like one is data, and the other one is your people that are going to use it. The most value is when you are close to both the data and the people. When you're working on hardware or when you're working on cloud platforms, you're probably very close to the data than to the people. Like, I'm not saying that's not useful. That's supremely useful. That's incredibly useful. But there are other people doing it. It's probably not like a best enterprise focus for a company like Sanofi that we worked with. But when it came to applications, it was clear, hey, we are going to sit on top of a bunch of data that's available today, but at the same time, really like plug into like a workday or a everyday of the bunch of users that we wanted to serve. So it kind of like was a good mix for us when it came to like picking the right type of applications or having an application focus.
Right, and then when we double click on it, obviously we're not exhausting this over here. We started to look at, what is the value that we are looking for, and not just that, but what is the feasibility. And what goes into, impact is pretty obvious, I hope, right? You have financial impact, you have non-financial impact, you have metrics you can track, but then there's also the feasibility. And I think that's way more complex, because it's not just technical and infrastructure feasibility, it's also how digitally savvy is your organization. Are they going to be willing to adopt those tools? Are they going to be willing to trust those tools? Especially in a regulated space like pharmaceuticals, healthcare, manufacturing, you start to see that trust element is farther away. And when you want to try and bring new mathematical approaches, new algorithmic approaches, you have to think about it a little bit differently, especially when you look at feasibility. So when we started to map this out, again, I haven't exhausted everything, but what we wanted to look for were very specific types of use cases we wanted to solve. And here, chatbot is a pretty obvious one. You want to be able to get in front with your customers. But then when you look at on the far top right, there are things like code development and maintenance of code repo. We had, I'm originally from Queen's University, and there was a talk we had previously around scalability of digital, and specifically, coding and software engineering, and a lot of questions around if your functions are going to be the same, if how you write your text is going to be the same with differences just in logic. That is fair game for GenAI. It's very easy for something like, for example, a GitHub Copilot to start to predict what you're going to write in your code, and your job as somebody who's in software engineering is just to adjust that code to make it work for yourself, test it, iterate, and so on and so forth. Those ones are high feasibility because we know we have software engineers, we have technical folks, but also very high impact, because now you need fewer software engineers to be able to write more code. But at the same time, we can repurpose them to be able to hit other use cases and other problems that we need to solve. You'll also see a bit lower in terms of impact, but just as high in terms of feasibility is regulatory changes. Especially in healthcare and pharma, there's tons and tons of regulatory changes by country for a global organization. And that's true for most of your organizations. Banking would be another one that comes right to mind. And for all of them, you have to think about, okay, well, if it's changing constantly, accounting standards, tax standards, regulation, is there a way I can summarize that internally? So we started to map this around, feasibility and impact, and started to pick about which ones are legacy AI, where we just need simple predictions, which ones are BI, where you just need a dashboard that does everything. That is the system of action that Shreyes was mentioning. And where do we actually really need generative capabilities, whether it's in marketing, content development, regulatory changes, so on and so forth. Shreyes, does this look similar?
Out of curiosity, does this mean GenAI is not a separate team, but within a team in AI?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think GenAI is within the team of AI because the mathematics and the structure and the adapt, at least in my opinion, I think it's solving a similar style of problem. We're solving it in the same way. But the business, like how close you are to the business becomes even more important. What's your view on that one?
I mean, for me, this slide impacts two things, right? The first thing is specificity. Like Gen AI, like I know, but it's not like general purpose AI. So you still have to get really, really specific on the problem that you are trying to solve. I think that's the number one key message. The second message that I think is super critical is this is a pretty risky thing, guys. Like, it could fail. There's a very, very, very high chance of failure. So, like, the only way that you could, like, de-risk this entire thing is, like, by placing it in, like, different things within your portfolio, perhaps. Like, don't just, like, go freaking do Gen AI. Like, go do a bunch of other things that kind of works. So, if Gen AI fails, like, it's probably one thing that failed and not everything that failed. So you have, like different stuff to do. So I think that's probably the key thing, Faisal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find very interesting as we sort of move into the next phase of how do we actually implement it is, I remember this sort of analogy that somebody gave me around Formula F1, and the first time they actually wanted to do prediction on how often they should be changing their tires between different laps. And that question was a very hard one to answer, specifically because there's a lot of people who had a lot of experience knowing when they should be changing tires. So somebody would be sitting, looking at the cars, looking at the metrics, and be able to determine, okay, now we need to do a pit stop so we can change the tires. In order to bring good old-fashioned AI, just simple prediction of when your tires are going to burn out, to them was a very, very hard challenge because they didn't trust it. And this is sort of, I'm calling it simple because in the age of Gen AI, it is simple, but you're looking at something that's very classic prediction. It's very sort of regression, classification type problems. Now try to imagine that with Gen AI, where now you have a risk of hallucination, where you have a risk of IP loss. There's many, many very serious risks, and a colleague of mine will later be talking about, a colleague of ours will be talking about responsible AI and how you think of that space as it pertains to Gen AI. So all of those things are very important, and when we get into sort of the implementation of these types of use cases, the 4 Ps really come to mind. And the first one, and I'll pass that on to you afterwards, Shreyes, is the P of prioritization or portfolio. When you start to organize how the problems that you're solving are actually in alignment with the use cases or with the strategy that the organization is looking to solve. That's the first part, and then the value that you generate. And I hope that today, if everybody gets very tired of hearing one thing, it's that we continue to focus on value, because otherwise we're just playing with toys. The idea of looking at how much does this cost and how much are we actually making from it has to be the bedrock.
And maybe just to like add on like a little bit more, right? Like it's actually 4 things to focus on. The first thing is like know what to do. It's kind of pretty simple, but a lot of the times because there is so much excitement, we want to do everything with it. So prioritize it. Most of us here are probably working either in the business or probably working on AI teams or analytics team that are like trying to help the business. So when you are in that way, like these guys have, if you are in my case, you're probably working a lot with business. So they kind of have an idea of where they want to go. They're not like stupid, so they know what to do. So just try work with them, identify what they want, and prioritize your Gen AI initiatives to the most important initiatives on their thing. It kind of usually works because then you're not selling like adoption. If they have already agreed it's an important thing, you don't have to like go sell adoption. You don't have to go fight for like budget or whatever. It's going to get approved anyway. So that kind of helps. Second thing is we spoke a lot about like systems of action and like all of those kinds of things. It's the most important thing in my head is that if you don't have the right technology, you're going to fail here. There is no question about it. If you don't focus on every little piece that needs to work from a technology perspective, you're going to fail. And it will be a very, very painful failure because others are going to succeed when you're failing. So be very, very focused and put the right efforts that needs to happen on the infrastructure side. And then the third thing, something that works very, very well for us is the partnerships. Find out and go work with the right type of partners. A lot of people are trying to get this right, but then some people can get it right better. So just figure out who they are and go work with them. And then the third thing is your people and the processes that you put around everything in GenAI. Faisal spoke about a few things, like responsible AI and stuff. I think those are great. You have to do it because otherwise they won't let you do Gen AI in the organization. So you just go do it. But then there are more like enabler type of things that you have to like kind of focus on as well, is on your people aspect. Like just building a nerve of it's okay if it fails. I think that's going to be super, super critical. But then another important thing for yourself and for the benefit of your organization is you got to like understand how to fail well in doing Gen AI. The way to fail is not like expose a bunch of customer data or expose a bunch of PII data. Right. The way to fail is maybe like instead of I don't know, like a little bit of like maybe if you could measure trust on Gen AI and like if it's lesser, and then like you could like iterate and get it better. So knowing how to fail well on Gen AI is going to be super critical, not just for people who are building Gen AI applications, but also for the leadership teams, for people who are using it, and also for maybe like your leaders in like different groups of the organization. And then, of course, like how do you grow like a data scientist? That's a big question most people have. Okay, you can hire someone as a data scientist, then you make them senior data scientists. Then what? Do they want to be chief data officers? No, chief data officers do totally different things. So we've not even figured out how to like manage. Like maybe some of you have, but at least I haven't seen like a repeatable framework across different places. Like software engineering is a very, very well-defined career path. Everybody gets it. Sales is a very, very well-defined career path. You go work the phones, then you go knock the doors, then you start managing people who do the same, and like it's a very, very clearly defined career role. But for Gen AI scientists, like how do you go define career roles for them? That's a huge question. I don't think a lot of us have answers to. So that is something that that you should work on and like have an idea around.
Yeah,
so,
and if you don't mind, I can add one more thing to what you just said as well. Is when you look at platforms and partnerships, the important thing there that has helped at least me think about it a lot better is build, borrow, buy. Right. So what are the problems you actually do need to solve? If you're going to build a CRM while Salesforce exists, is that really a problem worth solving for you? And I think that's been a very interesting space when it comes to new math and new technology, where you feel like the world is your oyster and you can solve everything that it's on offer to you. I think we're blessed with with a significant amount of PhDs per square foot within our organization. But what that means as a result of that is that there's a lot of brain power that can solve very, very complex problems. And now what ends up happening is our problem is the opposite, which is, can we pick the right problem again? So the build, borrow, buy strategy around, should we just partner with the vendors somewhere to solve that problem for us, or should we build it ourselves? I think is very critical in that second bucket when we look at the platforms and partnerships. And we'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, let us know.
Thank you so much, guys. Any questions?
We are very good.
I have a question.
Or not clear at all. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, so two things stood out to me. The phrase, we are building AI to build AI, and the myth of plugging into existing data sets. So it's clear the theme is around getting the right foundation to execute. So for a lot of us, we're trying to now kick off GenAI. What type of profile would be the seed role that we're trying to get to lead that team or lead that initiative?
Shreyes, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah. It's a tough question. Actually, I haven't thought about it, but it's not one person who's going to make a difference. I don't know. It has to be like a combination. Almost always starts with, hey, what is the business problem that we are trying to solve here? So you need to have a customer or a user. That is the first role in the organization. Once you have the customer or the user, then depending on the size of your organization, you have to pick the right people and ensure the wrong people stay out. That's just the reality of it. And when I say who the right people are, the first right people, at least in my head, is a software engineer, not a data scientist or a data engineer, because you want to be able to pull some APIs, build something interesting, show it, do a very cheap proof of concept. Because if you start with data engineers or data scientists, it's going to be a very, very expensive process. Finding a way to do it pretty cheap and pretty quickly, your software engineers generally could do it because there are so many APIs right now. So I would say that is very likely the first place that I would start. Have a customer, have an engineer, and see what happens from there.
Yeah, I would change slightly from the theme of tonight. I would diverse a little bit from what Shreya said, and I would actually do more of the data and business analyst type roles. But it would be a means to the exact same end. Is it that do you understand? I know one of the projects that I started on, the first question I was asking the business is, can you help me draw out a journey map? Like, what does the person actually do? They click here, they open this window, they solve this problem, they make this decision, so on and so forth. When that's laid out in that way, it's very easy. It's very, very easy just to pick out, like, that's a problem I want to solve. That's not worth solving. We're okay with that being manual for now. So just doing that, I think a team that's able to do it is very useful, I think, is at the onset, because then you don't do projects that are not valuable to you right away.
Yeah, very well said. Like we have heard as a theme before, it's all about driving value, right? Digging into the challenge. Any more questions for these guys around if GenAI is overhyped? All right, thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, sorry, we have one question. Let's just wait for a mic. One quick sec. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you. Myself is Venkat. I have a question around the same thing that, you mentioned that the GenAI can be plugged into any existing data set, right? So right now, we're maintaining a lot of traditional data sets or, analytical data warehouses. So in a long run, the GenAI is going to replace this kind of a traditional ETL mechanism to store, a lot of data into the data warehouses or, the data sets that you're mentioning, or it will be always on top of these data sets?
So I think the jury is still out on that. I think people are trying to work with Pinecone and vector databases to power GenAI. So as a pure, hey, let's build this for scale, let's build this for speed, I think the answer is going to be go use vector databases. That might mean moving a bunch of your data that you might not have on vector databases into vector databases. But I don't really know what will play out. Most of the things that we do are built out of vector databases.
And to add on to that, I think plugging into GenAI on top of existing data, I think is very interesting, because you can do that right now, right? If you take sort of existing models, feed it your own data for your own context, you're able to produce a GenAI that gives you sort of language that you need to use, or images or content or what have you. But that's, I think, where technically you need sort of a stronger infrastructure, but even practically you need to understand if that's actually going to solve the problem. In a couple of instances, we tried, for example, Llama, ChatGPT-4, a couple of different ones, with either right out of the box, and performance looked at it after we fed it our own data that was not critical, or we feed it something like synthetic data because we want it to be more private and PII focused. All of that comes down to obviously having the good quality data, which is right back to garbage in, garbage out.
All right, perfect.
Cool.
Okay.
Any more questions?
If not, thank you for the gentlemen for getting us a second round of applause.
All right, everyone. You guys can go. Thanks. All right, just a quick housekeeping. We have one more session with Jiva, and then after his session, we have a planned break right after. So just don't worry, you guys have a planned break in about 30 minutes. Just while we wait on Jiva to get mic'd up, does anybody want to share maybe a GenAI project you have noodling? And I don't mind to go first. So like you guys probably heard, I work at OLG. I think there's a really big opportunity to execute content kind of automatically with some guidance, of course, by the government. There's a lot of people who stop playing our games. This is in the casino world, not lottery. Stop playing the games because they have a technical issue and they just drop off. But if the GenAI was a little bit smarter and can craft something that was more direct to them, I think we can, curb the churn rate off of our website a bit better. Does anyone want to share any use case they have? I know it's a tough one to ask. There's There's another one too that I'm also looking at is to analyze the voice of the customer. So in OLG, we collect a lot of survey data if someone is on our website. So like we just prompt them, Qualtrics. I'm sure you guys use Qualtrics. Does anybody here use Qualtrics? It's like a prompt that pops up on the website and ask them a question, did you like your experience today? But the problem that I see is that data is collected, but it's not really actioned right away in a usable format instead of just bar graphs. And I feel like using that as like a RAG entry would be really useful, and like to pipe kind of insights over to product owners can make sure they action it more quicker than letting something be stale for like weeks on end. Go ahead. Do you have a mic?
Hi, my name is Ali from TD. I'm in the world of fraud, a lot of fraud detection. The problem we face is that while we are trying to build new capabilities in fraud, the amount of data that we have in the lower environment is limited. And I feel that GenAI is something that can help us build data in the lower environment that also has the similar characteristics like production. So it's easy to just generate random data, but when you have to generate random data with the characteristics or with the linkages that you need as equivalent to production to be able to test your scenarios in your test cases, I think that's where GenAI will help us.
Yeah, interesting. So it's almost like high quality synthetic data.
Yeah, high quality synthetic data.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.